Hi everybody! I would like to start doing some book reviews just on books that I've read recently and have something to say about them. Usually I read fantasy, sci-fi, but sometimes other books catch my eye, and so I'm really into reviewing any type of book. Most of them will probably be science fiction and fantasy just because that's what I like, but sometimes I go into like time travel romance or historical fiction. All of those are really interesting to me. So what I want to do is analyze different aspects of the book and kind of go in depth on how each book performs based on different criteria, like the plot of the book, the setting, the characters, and the technical aspects like writing, the prose, how well it's done grammatically or like editing wise. And hopefully, like in this process, I'll become a better analyzer and kind of learn more of the art of creating a well constructed book. And if this is something that interests you, you'll also maybe learn something too about how, what kind of thought has to go into creating a good book. So first off, I'm going to start out with Recreance or Recreance. I wasn't quite sure how to pronounce it, by H.G. Chambers. It's on Amazon, and I believe it's available on Kindle Unlimited. Otherwise, you have to buy it. I don't know if it's available on other platforms, but Amazon is where I came across. So to start out, Recreance, I'm gonna have to decide how to pronounce it at some point, but it's about a world where there's a city called New Arcadia, and two different characters have to kind of discover the truth about this city and what is really going on and underneath the surface, and overcome the obstacles regarding what really is going on. It's kind of like got a conspiratorial sort of element to it. It's got a kind of like authoritarian, tyrannical government aspect to it, which I thought overall I really liked this book, and I thought that H.G. Chambers did a good job of kind of revealing the layers of what exactly is going on in this world. So I guess I'll start off with the setting. I think the setting it's the setting meaning like the world building. The different like descriptions of the technology or the magic systems, the environment itself, all those can go into the setting. And I thought this was really where this book shined, was the world building and the setting. H.G. Chambers did an amazing job of describing different kind of like new and things I hadn't run across before in some cases, of different types of like technology, or imagining where like how a very futuristic city might look and function. So part of it is that this city, New Arcadia, floats above the ground and is kind of like propulsed upwards. And he goes a little bit into how that works, and makes it a bit of a interesting kind of like a tense moment for one of the characters. Other parts of that I really enjoyed were kind of the esoteric and mysticism elements that were behind the magic system. There is a sort of magic system in this book called Gathering, and it's a bit of an interesting blend of magic and science fiction. I thought it was really well done. It's clear that H.G. Chambers put a lot of thought into creating his world and fleshing out like what everything means and how it all works. He even goes a little bit into like parallel worlds and all that stuff, and it all works really well, I think. Another thing that I really enjoyed was his descriptions of the desert, which I believe is pronounced the Miralaja Desert outside of the city of New Arcadia. And I really kind of felt like I was there when I was reading those passages. He goes a lot into kind of how it looks, how it feels, the dangers, and the dangers of how living in a desert might manifest. They're like dangerous creatures, the need for water, the need for food. All of those came across really well and really well thought out as well. Like he put a lot of thought and maybe, I'm sure, some research into what it's like to survive in the desert. So that all worked really well. The next thing I want to talk about is the plot. And I think the plot was pretty good. Oh, before I forget, I can give you a rating, kind of like a score out of 10 for each aspect of the book, and then averaging it all together, kind of give my overall thoughts on the book. So for world building, I give it a 9 out of 10. And the only reason I don't give it a 10 out of 10 is because at some points when he goes into the descriptions of the technology, he kind of talks about like reversing the polarity and another kind of gimmicky sort of things, in my opinion. And I'm sure it works for a lot of people. For me, it was a little off because just because I've heard silly phrases like that, usually in a parody sort of sense, of like, we have to reverse the polarity to escape the black hole. It came across a little bit silly in that regard at points. Otherwise, I think it all worked really well, and 9 out of 10 is a really, really good score, and I think it's very rare for me to give 10 out of 10 sort of scores, unless it's just utterly amazing and I don't find any flaws within it. The next thing I want to talk about is plot, and I give that an 8 out of 10, just because for the most part it worked really well. Like, it went along at a solid pace. I didn't find any plot holes or inconsistencies. The story had some major beats that hit at a good rhythm. The only thing I would say is that toward the end, it got more rushed and it happened a lot quicker, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think towards the climax, things should speed up, the tensions should rise, the stakes should get higher. I did think that at the end, the story got a little just too quick. It kind of glossed over some things that were really important points that I think needed to be spent a little more time on. And we could talk about spoilers down the road for those who might be interested or who have read this book and want to hear what I thought about those different plot points. So for now, I just have an 8 out of 10. Pretty solid, pretty great. Maybe just a couple things here and there where I maybe would have done something different, or I would have recommended H.G. Chambers do something different. So the next thing is the characters. And I gave the characters a 6 out of 10. And here's why, because I don't think there were any really bad characters per se, but there was a couple points where some of the characters, or at least particularly one of the characters, just kind of didn't do it for me at points. So there are two main characters. Their names are Clementine and Orange. And they're both kind of young, like I'd say 15 probably at the very beginning of the story. And they stumble across some things that kind of spur the events of the rest of the book. So Oren, in the process of, just by his family circumstance, he loses his parents. And it's a really sad moment for him. Like, he dwells on it. It's part of his character. It impacts him in a really significant way. He isn't like the best at everything. It's kind of clear from reading the story that he's not like the brightest. He's not the most amazing at like technical things or mechanical things or like science. And later on, he's not the best or most talented at the kind of magic system. But that's okay, because that makes him like relatable in that way. He's not actually the best at everything, but he's overcoming things, and he is getting better through hard work. And that's what I really appreciate about Oren's character. He also makes mistakes too. Like, he kind of gets angry. He's a little bit hot-headed at times and doesn't really fully explain himself very well necessarily to others. He also has a hard time trusting others based on how he lost his parents. And so later on, when some characters come back into his life, he automatically is very, very, very angry with them because in his perception, they had to do with his parents' death. So it took him a long time to accept this person. So I really liked Oren overall. He's definitely like kind of the everyman of the book. He's the person that I think most readers would relate to the most because he is the most like normal. The other character is Clementine, and overall I liked her. There were some points where I hate using the term Mary Sue because I feel like it gets thrown around a lot, but there's a reason it gets thrown around a lot, and that's because a lot of times people don't, maybe sometimes they're not intentional, but sometimes characters tread into Mary Sue territory for whatever reason. And I feel that Clementine does tread into Mary Sue territory at times. She's, within the space of a couple of years, she becomes a master thief, which isn't that bad because, whatever, for the sake of fantasy, I'm willing to kind of, especially young adult fantasy, I'm willing to kind of be like, whatever, it's been a couple years, they've had to work hard, they've had to make hard choices, and they become a master at something that they might already have had a talent at. And in this case, Oren also kind of becomes a fighter, a really strong fighter that can rival his master if he were to apply himself consistently. And so in the space of 2 years, they became really, really good at something. And 2 years may be a little short for me. I would have been like, if it was 5 years, I would have believed it a lot more quickly. But I just I went through it. I went and I rolled along with it and accepted it for the sake of the story. Anyway, Clementine also, whatever she tries next, she just automatically is really good at. Later down the road, she learns how to use a bow and arrow, and where Oren wasn't particularly good at it, like he was okay, she pretty much literally in the first sentence it's talked about, masters it pretty well. And she just becomes a very good bow and arrow user. And then even later, when they start learning how to use the magic system, she just automatically becomes unprecedentedly talented in that as well. Like the first time she uses it to a degree at which other people who are extremely good at using this magic system comment on how prodigious and how unprecedented her ability is. Like they've never seen anybody use the magic that quickly before. And so I just had to kind of roll my eyes at those instances just because I'm like, seriously, do you really have to make her the automatically good at everything? If it were a kind of a trade-off between her and Oren, I don't think I would necessarily like that better, but at least it'd be a little more equal. It made me like Oren overall a lot better just because he was consistently having to work for something. He was having to struggle and overcome these obstacles put before him, and he didn't just automatically do them really well. The other thing is that Clementine, and I feel like this is a thing that happens a lot with female characters. Not necessarily, I guess maybe not a lot, but sometimes, where everyone just automatically likes her for no real good reason. She kind of comes off, for good reason, she comes off as an asshole at first, just because she's scared. She doesn't trust anybody. She's had a really hard life based on the background given to us by H.G. Chambers. And so she's not necessarily the easiest person to work with at first. And yet, some major characters who are kind of the mentor figures all like her, kind of right off the bat without really having a reason to that's really clear. It's just because she's really cool, I guess. She's a master thief. She can do anything she wants perfectly already without trying. So, yeah, I guess that kind of played into it. Overall, again, I did like Clementine. She had some really cool aspects. She did it really well at balancing Oren. Oren wasn't necessarily intellectually bright. He was good at fighting, good at swordsmanship, and she was kind of the mechanical, technical master. She can break apart any technology and put it back together again and understand how it worked. And I thought that was actually fine. That was a really good thing because it was obvious that she had worked toward that expertise. So she had some really good parts, and then other parts I just really had to roll my eyes. So that's why I give the characters a 6 out of 10, which is still above average. 5 out of 10 is an average, and 6 is a little bit above that, just because if it weren't for the fact that Clem could do everything really easily, very, very difficult things really easily, then I maybe would have given another, an 8 or a 9 maybe out of 10. Okay, so moving on to the last part, which is the technical aspects. So this is the kind of, what is the quality of writing like? Does the author do a good job describing? Does the author have a good command of how to create sentences, how to create flow between the sentences and words? And I thought he did a really pretty good job at that. I'd say I'd give it overall a 7 out of 10 because the writing itself, the style, was pretty good. There was just quite a few instances of me noticing maybe some grammatical things or some use of phrases that aren't really the greatest to use in writing. He used a lot of there was statements, which could be worded a lot better so that it doesn't sound so passive. He did use passive voice every once in a while. It wasn't too bad. And then I think the most thing I noticed was just he seemed to be allergic to commas, especially in dialogue. So if he had a phrase like, yeah, okay, but, it wouldn't have a comma between the yeah, okay, and but, which technically should be there. It would be yeah, okay, but. And to me, that kind of it didn't detract overall from my enjoyment of the story, but I didn't notice it. And I think were he to have a proofreader or professional editor look at it, which he might have, but for whatever reason they chose not to change those things or edit those things that way. It did give it a little bit of a less professional look, maybe. I don't know if I'm really saying it the right way, because I don't want to say that he didn't do a good job of writing, because he did. It was just there's some technical aspects that I would have changed or I would have paid attention to were I an editor or I was writing the story. So yeah, I think overall, I think that averages out to 7.5 out of 10, which is solidly between average and really great. I really enjoyed this story. I highly recommend it for people who enjoy sci-fi and fantasy. It has a really great blend of the scientific elements as well as the fantasy elements. Moving into spoiler territory, if you like parallel world sort of things and like portals to other places, that covers then that, and it's really cool. I think he pulled it off really well. He also did a really good job of layering how the different conspiracies over centuries and thousands of years add up to the current situation they have in their story today. So thousands of years ago, there was some, like a government that was ruled by a just man. His brother ends up gaining some power as like a rebel and ends up killing him, and then becomes the immortal leader, dictator really, of this new political entity or like government. I guess something else that I should add is that a long time ago, this version of the human race figured out how to become immortal, and since then, the government kind of used it as a way to control population and to subject their populace. So they lied about, they made it kind of seem like that if they were to let everybody be immortal, then they would run out of food and resources. But if you really paid attention, that wasn't the case. It was just a tool to control the people. And that all like came off pretty good. I think there was some times where I wasn't quite sure why the villain felt the way he did. He ends up killing his brother, and there doesn't seem to be a motivation beyond he just hates his brother, which I wasn't really sure why, and maybe it'll be dealt with in future books, but at the time I was just kind of like, okay, he just hates him, I guess, and wanted to spite him and did horrible things in order to spite his brother. But overall, I really enjoyed this story. I'd highly recommend it for anybody who's a fan of the genre. If you're willing to kind of gloss over a few things, just like minor things, really. It's not perfect, and no book is, but I think it was really good and worth your time reading. Thanks, everybody, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.